we often hear tales of sagas, of ferocious raids, and of Viking longships cutting through the morning mist. Yet, behind every heroic chronicle lies a silence, particularly concerning the fates of high-born women who vanish from the pages of history as soon as Viking axes begin their deadly dance. Queens, princesses, and daughters of kings, who yesterday ruled from impregnable stone castles, today languish in the holds of ships carried off into the unknown. What became of these women when the smoke of battle cleared and ransom negotiations reached a dead end? What fate awaited royal blood that crossed the threshold into the Viking world? Imagine Dublin in 841. Here, the slave market is bustling, and iron shackles gleam ominously on wooden posts lining the River Liffey. Arab silver changes hands, but today no ordinary slaves are for sale. These are queens and princesses from captured kingdoms whose crowns were ruthlessly melted down for ship nails. These narratives are based on serious research and confirmed facts. Specifically, they draw upon a 2017 DNA analysis published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, which proved that the famous female warrior from Birka, BJ 581, was indeed a woman. Recent archaeological discoveries presented in January 2025 by archaeologist Søren Dindorf from the University Museum of Bergen are also considered, which revealed the burials of noble women at Fjørtofte in Norway, adorned with artifacts from England and Ireland. Now, let us return to the main subject. Dublin, 975 AD. Every morning, Viking ships arrive at Wood Quay, bringing silver from the east, amber from the Baltic, and women captured from across the Irish Sea. Dublin's slave market had become the largest in Western Europe, where human capital was systematically supplied from the Irish hinterlands, Wales, and Scotland. These were not merely opportunistic raids, but a well-organized system. Historical evidence confirms that Vikings, raiding coastal towns from the British Isles to the Iberian Peninsula, captured thousands of men, women, and children. Among them were queens, princesses, and noble ladies, whose disappearance from historical records marks their entry into a world we are only beginning to understand through modern archaeological research. The Annals of Ulster for 821 report, Howth in Dublin was plundered, and a great booty of women was carried off. This was not just about women, but about valuable women, high-ranking individuals who were worth more alive than dead, representing a political tool rather than mere labor. Consider the Viking logic: raid a monastery, and the monks are killed for silver chalices. But when a royal court is the target, the calculation changes. Dead queens would yield no ransom, whereas living ones could be exchanged, married off, or used to exert influence for years to come. Archaeological findings indicate that marriages could be used to end feuds between families, and suggest that a woman might have been regarded by male family members as a valuable object in inter-family politics, to be traded with or without her consent. By some estimates, slaves constituted up to 10% of the population of Viking-age Scandinavia. However, not all slaves were equal. The greatest value lay not with field laborers, but with former rulers whose genealogies were worth preserving and political connections that could be exploited. Viking chiefs understood they could gain quick and significant profit by ransoming high-status captives back to their communities or families. But the sagas remain silent about what transpired when ransoms failed to materialize. Archaeological data from Dublin reveals a darker picture. Iron shackles and collars, found during excavations in urban centers such as Dublin, Birka, and Hedeby, attest to the existence of large-scale slave trade. These findings were not associated with agricultural tools. Their concentration near harbors and their urban location point to an industrial scale of human trafficking. Dublin Port was an ideal location for a market importing and exporting people across Europe. From here, royal captives could be sent to Iceland, where Celts comprised 40% of the founding population, to Scandinavia, or eastward to the Byzantine Empire, where Viking mercenaries served as the emperor's guard. But some queens were not destined to travel so far. The warrior burial from Birka, discovered in 1878, was considered male for over a century. However, in 2017, DNA analysis proved that the great warrior was a woman, buried with a sword, axe, combat knife, spears, shields, and 25 armor-piercing arrows. But something else was found, a strategic board game with 28 playing pieces. Complete game sets are often associated with Viking military leaders, and the textiles and a tasseled cap worn by this woman indicate cavalry commanders reporting directly to a royal warlord. This was not just a female warrior. Isotopic analysis showed that she likely grew up outside Scandinavia. Could she have been a captured queen who forged her own position through strength? The question becomes even more complex when we examine the treatment of high-status female captives. Some evidently integrated into Viking society at the highest levels. Others faced a completely different fate. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who traveled along the Volga in 922 AD, witnessed a Viking funeral. He described a female slave who voluntarily offered to be sacrificed when a Viking chief died. But this description warrants careful reading. It was not a random choice. The deceased's family first asked slaves if any of them wished to accompany their master into the afterlife. Why would anyone willingly choose death? Ibn Fadlan reports that the alternative for deceased slaves was to be thrown to dogs and birds. For a captive queen, facing a choice between the life of an ordinary slave and a ritual death that might preserve some dignity, this choice became grimly logical. The study of bone remains bearing traces of human sacrifice reveals a disquieting pattern. Victims often experience starvation, indicating their slave status rather than belonging to a free class. Archaeological findings in burials across Scandinavia attest to the systematic interment of sacrificial victims alongside Viking nobility, with many of these victims bearing the imprint of malnutrition and abuse. An example is the Oseberg ship burial, dated to 834 AD, where the remains of 2 women were discovered, surrounded by luxurious objects. The richness of the burial leads archaeologists to suggest that one of the interred women may have been a 9th century ruler of Norway. However, the question arises, which one? And why are there 2? Drawing on evidence such as Ibn Fadlan's account, where dead chiefs were accompanied to the grave by their slaves, the Oseberg mystery might be resolved by assuming one woman was a queen and the other her high-born captive, important enough to merit joint burial, but whose identity was deliberately consigned to oblivion. Unfortunately, grave robbers preceded archaeologists at Oseberg, stealing the ship's adornments that might have shed light on which woman was the queen. However, no less interesting is the fate of queens who survived captivity. Recent excavations at Fjørtofte, Norway, have yielded surprising finds, including fragments of gilded oval brooches, part of a metal cauldron, and a book clasp refashioned into an ornament. The clasp, likely torn from a Christian Bible during raids in England or Ireland, was transformed into a woman's brooch, indicating these women's contacts outside Norway and possibly their foreign origin. Such finds suggest that high-ranking foreign women became part of the Viking aristocracy through strategic marriages. Thus, the evidence points to a complex and multifaceted system. The fate of captured queens was not predetermined. Some became political pawns and participants in marital alliances, others achieved high status, while still others became victims of ritual sacrifices. Many, however, disappeared forever from historical chronicles. The Isle of Man provides disturbing evidence of such a tragic fate. At the Balladul burial site, a ship burial was discovered containing a Viking warrior and a woman, interred without any grave goods, in an unnatural pose, and with signs of violent death. The Manx Museum interprets this as a possible slave sacrifice as part of an elite funeral. Isotopic analysis showed that the woman was not local, but came from afar, possibly from royal courts. The position of her body, in contrast to the carefully arranged weapons and ornaments of the warrior, suggests haste and neglect. Traces of trauma from a sharp object were found on her neck, indicating execution. These conclusions are based on peer-reviewed archaeological work, including an analysis published in the journal Slavery and Abolition in April 2019 by researcher Ben Raffield, as well as excavation reports from the National Museum of Ireland documenting slave collars and chains found in medieval layers of Dublin. This data continues to deepen our understanding of this dark chapter in history. Excavations at Fested, Denmark, reveal another interesting pattern. Here, a woman was discovered buried in a horse-drawn carriage in luxurious attire, adorned with gold thread, with bronze bowls from the east, and a unique box brooch. Among her grave goods were over 70 beads, manufactured across Europe and the British Isles, some of which were at least 300 years old at the time of her death. These were not merely ornaments, but relics passed down through generations of Anglo-Saxon and Celtic royal families, which could only have left their owners under the most extreme circumstances. Archaeological evidence indicates that raids targeting young people may have been one way to acquire valuable captives. The life of Saint Ansgar suggests that slaves were a commodity that could be traded, with people often held for ransom rather than simply sold into slavery. The pagan Lady of Peel, discovered on the Isle of Man, presents another example of a captive's complex fate. Her rich burial contained a necklace of over 70 beads from across Europe. She led a nomadic lifestyle while maintaining a connection to her Scandinavian homeland. However, forensic analysis of her remains reveals the tragic story of how she acquired this mobile lifestyle. Dental analysis showed that she experienced periods of severe malnutrition in childhood, inconsistent with a royal upbringing, but consistent with periods of captivity. Nevertheless, her adult bones show evidence of a high-status diet and no signs of manual labor. She transitioned from captive to nobility, but the scars of childhood remained forever in her teeth. The story of royal captives in the Viking Age is full of tragedy and triumph. DNA analysis and artifacts reveal astonishing facts about their fates in the harsh world of Scandinavian conquerors. Research indicates that approximately 15% of high-status female burials in Viking Age Scandinavia contain the remains of women born outside the region. This suggests a systematic integration of foreign women into the upper echelons of Viking society, which involved certain sacrifices. Textile analysis from these burials demonstrates an interesting pattern: hybrid garments, combining Scandinavian styles with non-Scandinavian materials, or traditional patterns executed in costly imported silk, served as a means of cultural adaptation. Captured queens, balancing the preservation of their identity with adaptation to their captors' demands, used clothing as a language of survival, intertwining traditions of home and foreign lands. Excavations at the Viking camp in Repton uncovered a mass burial from 873-874, containing the remains of at least 250 individuals, among whom were 30 women who died not from wounds, but from systematic executions. Judging by signs of a high-status diet, these women held high positions in society. The executions occurred over several months, indicating deliberate extermination. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports the division of the Viking army in 874, when some warriors went north, while others remained to establish permanent settlements. The mass executions at Repton coincide with this political event. As Viking priorities shifted from raiding to settling, costly captives became a burden, and royal women, previously held for ransom or political influence, were eliminated. However, some queens managed to change their fate. In the Westness Cemetery on Rousset, in the Orkney Islands, the grave of a woman buried around 850 AD was discovered with a pin brooch from Westness, a symbol of high status. Her remains were found alongside the bones of an unborn child. Isotopic analysis showed that she grew up in Ireland, and the child's father's DNA was Scandinavian. This is an example of successful integration through marriage, where an Irish aristocrat managed to transition from hostage to queen, dying in childbirth while carrying a future Viking king. Game pieces found in the burials of noble women indicate their role in strategic decision-making. Board games such as Kneffatafel were associated with military leadership. The discovery of complete game sets in female graves suggests that captured queens could have acted as strategic advisors, using their knowledge of their homelands and political situations to plan raids and negotiations. Excavations at Torksey, Lincolnshire, where the Great Viking Army's winter camp was located, revealed evidence of highly skilled metalworking. Jewelry with hybrid designs combining Scandinavian techniques with Anglo-Saxon motifs indicates collaboration between foreign craftswomen and Viking metalworkers. Captured royal women possessing valuable craft knowledge contributed to the development of Viking technologies. The Spillings hoard on Gotland, buried around 900 AD, contained over 87 kilograms of silver, including Islamic coins, Byzantine artifacts, and European silver, as well as female jewelry from various kingdoms that had been remodeled. Modifications to the jewelry, executed in Scandinavian style, indicate that captured queens not only integrated into Viking society, but also actively remodeled captured regalia, adapting them to their new roles. DNA analysis of burials near Spillings confirms the presence of women of foreign origin during this period. Examining the role of captive royal individuals in the Viking Age opens new facets of understanding this period. Initially, historical sources often portrayed captured princesses and queens as passive victims. However, in-depth analysis of various data suggests that these women played a significant role in Viking society, influencing the economy, politics, and culture. Data from the Hedeby slave market sheds light on the economic aspects of this phenomenon. Market rules, carved on stone tablets, testify to a clear pricing system for different categories of captives. The price of a royal woman could be equivalent to the cost of 3 warships or 50 head of cattle. However, the tablets also contain information on the ongoing costs of maintenance and the potential profitability of such investments. Human trafficking was not an emotional act, but the result of complex economic analysis. Vikings considered not only the initial cost, but also the potential lifetime value of captives. Maintaining royal women was expensive, but they could generate income through ransom, political marriages, specialized skills, and the ability to bear legitimate heirs. Of particular value is Ibn Fadlan's testimony, contained in an extended report recently translated from manuscript sources found in Iran. His description of the slave sacrifice includes details previously censored by medieval scholars. The voluntary victim underwent meticulous preparation over several months. She was provided with special food, separate accommodation, and trained in ritual procedures. This was not an act of spontaneous religious fanaticism, but a carefully planned preparation of a valuable sacrifice. It is important to note that Ibn Fadlan mentions she spoke several languages and knew the diplomatic protocols of various kingdoms. She was not merely a slave, but an individual possessing extensive knowledge of royal courts, possibly a captured princess being prepared for the ultimate political sacrifice. This ritual was not only a religious act, but also a tool of psychological warfare. Rumors of such ceremonies spread to neighboring kingdoms, demonstrating the fate awaiting royal families who resisted Viking demands. The message was clear: submit and negotiate, or see your daughters burn on funeral pyres. Archaeological finds in Scandinavia confirm this interpretation. Numerous sites contain traces of large ceremonial pyres, in which human remains are found mixed with luxury items from different kingdoms. The location of these pyres indicates that these were not isolated religious rites, but coordinated political actions aimed at intimidating potential enemies. However, some queens found ways to use the system to their advantage. The burial at Ardnamurchan, discovered in 2011, represents a unique case. This is a ship burial in Great Britain, in which a woman was buried with warrior equipment and household items. Isotopic analysis showed that she grew up in Scandinavia, but the burial site and mixed grave goods suggest that she was a Viking leader in Scottish territory. Perhaps this was a woman of Scandinavian origin leading raids against her ancestors' enemies, or a captured Scottish princess who adapted so successfully that she herself became a Viking chieftain. Environmental archaeology conducted in the Fjørtofte area reveals another dimension to this story. Pollen analysis indicates that the land was cultivated using agricultural methods previously unknown in Scandinavia during the Viking Age. These techniques align with those employed in Anglo-Saxon England and Celtic Ireland during the same period, suggesting a systematic transfer and implementation of foreign agricultural knowledge. It is probable that captured royal women possessed a profound understanding of advanced farming practices, which they brought from their homelands. The pollen analysis implies they actively taught and introduced these methods within their new Scandinavian residences. Furthermore, recent analysis of textile fragments discovered in various Scandinavian settlements has identified weaving techniques that were not known in Scandinavia before the Viking Age, but were common in Anglo-Saxon and Celtic territories. The simultaneous appearance of these techniques in multiple locations points towards coordinated instruction rather than incidental cultural borrowing. It is highly probable that these educated and authoritative captured queens and princesses coordinated the transfer of such technologies, instructing local craftswomen in foreign techniques. Archaeological evidence suggests they did not merely adapt to Viking culture, but actively transformed it. Moreover, genetic analysis of the contemporary Scandinavian population provides further corroboration. Recent studies have identified significant Celtic and Anglo-Saxon genetic markers in regions that correlate with historical records of Viking settlement origin. However, these markers exhibit patterns inconsistent with random intermarriage. Instead, the genetic data points to the periodic introduction of foreign genetic material in quantities consistent with historical accounts of mass captive taking. The Vikings, renowned for their conquests, were not averse to taking captives, particularly those of noble birth. Genetic studies of female lineages indicate that high-status women from foreign lands successfully integrated into Scandinavian society and bore descendants. Archaeological discoveries support this hypothesis, demonstrating that captured queens not only survived but also became founders of new dynasties. Their progeny held prominent positions within the Scandinavian aristocracy, continuing both local and foreign royal bloodlines. However, this success came at a considerable cost. Entire royal dynasties were extinguished, and kingdoms lost not only their ruling figures, but also future generations. While the cultural and genetic legacy of the captured queens enriched Viking civilization, it simultaneously impoverished their native lands. In a limestone cave near Trondheim, archaeologists unearthed a unique cache of personal belongings, dated to approximately 950 AD. Among the finds was a collection of small wooden tablets inscribed with a mixture of runic and Latin script. Deciphering the text suggests these are fragments of a diary or memoirs belonging to a foreign woman who resided in Scandinavia. The entries reflect homesickness, strategies for adaptation, and observations on the differences between Scandinavian and her native customs. One entry mentions children forgetting their mother's lullabies. This could be the sole surviving first-person account from a captured queen, striving to preserve the memory of her homeland while adapting to life in Viking society. The fact that these records were hidden rather than openly kept indicates that these women had to maintain a precarious balance between honoring their origins and demonstrating loyalty to their captors. The tablets also contain genealogical records, tracing several family lines over generations. Should the authenticity of these records be confirmed, it would suggest that captured queens meticulously documented their descendants, possibly in preparation for a restoration of legitimate power should the political landscape shift. Radiocarbon dating places the tablets in a period of active Viking colonization of Norway, a time frame corroborated by historical sources. Linguistic analysis reveals that the Latin fragments were penned by someone with a sound religious education whilst the runic inscriptions demonstrate a fluent command of Scandinavian script. Such a combination of high-level Latin literacy and the practical necessity of mastering runic script for survival in Viking society would likely have been unique to a captured queen. This hidden cache represents a secret archive of resistance, adaptation, and memory preservation. The stories of these women endure not in the sagas glorifying their conquerors, but within the archaeological evidence. Every foreign isotopic signature, every refashioned royal artifact, every trace of non-Scandinavian knowledge integrated into Viking culture bears witness to a life torn from one world and painstakingly rebuilt in another. Some managed to thrive, while others fell victim to rituals. The majority balanced precariously between survival and subjugation, leaving traces of their existence scattered throughout archaeological data, like fragments of shattered crowns melted down into ship nails. The fate of these hostage queens following Viking conquests was etched not in chronicles, but in bone and silver, in genetic markers and hidden tablets, and in the gradual transformation of captured nobility into the very bedrock of Viking civilization.